Taxis and PTC vehicles.
They should be.
Anyone that transports the public. They're taxis too.
You mentioned the fact that you want to have cameras in the vehicle.
Yes,
And this is a camera which would be mounted on a permanent basis, I take it?
it would be it would be permanent, would be one that would be approved by the city. Right now we have 20, in 98, they mandated cameras. And so they're old, antiquated cameras that have to go to, forensics to be downloaded, where there are new cameras now that could be downloaded, information could be downloaded by the police by an email and
This is
not
not a
hold up the
camera
car.
on PTCs where somebody has a phone and he turns that phone on and has the camera rolling and just recording. You want a permanent camera from the time the person walks into the PTC vehicle or the cab that this camera starts rolling. It's not in the control of the individual, the driver. but
It's for police purposes in the event of a crime.
You also mentioned something about, if I heard you correctly, something about vehicles, hybrids.
Yes, right now, organically, as I say, taxis are mostly hybrids or fuel efficient. It just makes sense. And to miss this opportunity to make 90,000 more sedans hybrid or fuel efficient just seems, it's just sad.
So if we were to say that the PTCs they don't have to be hybrid, would the taxi industry also be in favor of not having hybrid vehicles?
No, when you reduce regulation on us, in 2016, we scrambled to maintain those standards, to maintain as much regulation as we could, and so we would still look for the hybrid cars.
So in order to be ecological friendly, and as the city moves along, we want to have less of a footprint of melting of the polar cap and everything else. What you're suggesting, and you're encouraging today to us, is to make sure that the vehicles, regardless if they're PTCs or cabs, for them to be hybrid.
They should be hybrid. The sedans should be hybrid.
Okay.
I know it's more difficult for the vans.
All right, thank you very much.
Other questions of the deputy? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you very much for the questions.
Sorry, is Christine Hubbard back in the room?
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Appreciate it.
You have 5 minutes whenever you're ready, and the clock is over there.
Got it. So I don't usually read straight from a piece of paper or something I've written, but in the interest of staying within 5 minutes, because I have so much to say, I'm going to do my best to try to get it all in. I've got it here. So Christine Hubbard, I'm Operations Manager at Beck Taxi. I've been participating in what seems like an ongoing review since 2011. It's still obviously not done. Government regulation, as we know it, is the minimum standard. I think everyone can agree on that. We know this because participants in a regulated industry are not allowed to do less than the standards set by government, but they can choose to do more. Minimum standards tend to increase when it comes to public safety, accessibility, and environmental protections. Examples include changes to the trucking industry and requirements for technology companies recently. For some reason, the vehicle for hire industry seems to be the only one moving in the opposite direction. The existing bylaw and this report being reviewed today make that clear. In 1998, a review was initiated as a result of concern regarding vehicle safety and driver training directly related to public and worker safety. The City of Toronto realized that there was a lack of municipal oversight. Logically, the minimum standard was raised. Vehicle inspections had to be done at the city's inspection facility on Eastern Avenue every 6 months, including a mechanical and condition of vehicle inspection. Age of vehicles was cut in half, and a 17-day course was introduced for anyone who wanted to be licensed not just to drive, because there is a difference. This is not your provincial driver's license, but to cruise Toronto streets, navigating bike lane infrastructure, approaching curbside consistently. Sensitivity and accessibility training, along with knowing how to get to important locations like hospitals, this is necessary as representatives of our city. Mandatory refresher training was required every few years as well. This is the kind of policy that protects people, riders, drivers, cyclists, pedestrians, and other road users. None of this came at any cost to the city. In fact, it created jobs for city employees under a model of cost recovery paid for by the very people who were being licensed. In 2016, in the name of so-called innovation, the clock was turned back on these items to pre-1998. Training canceled, inspection station closed in favor of what they had found substandard previously, back to basic safety certificates, and even worse than before, now we just send a photograph or a scanned image of that safety certificate. The bar has been lowered. Somehow the minimum standard on safety and public protection has been lowered further by this report when it comes to, again, safety, but also the environment. The city has set goals for lowering emissions, and rather than apply the environmental requirement for sedans, for taxi sedans, to all vehicles for hire, instead they've removed it from those that were actually mandated in the first place. Leveling the playing field, let's just not even use that term anymore. We know that's out the window, so let's just not. I'm stunned. I'm stunned by this report, I have to admit. It's vague at best. Things like training being mentioned, but without any clarification. I understand that PTC companies are looking for the path of least resistance. That is evidence, there's evidence everywhere to support that. But defensive driving has to be learned in a car. Safety and human rights related training has to be done in person. If customer service is online, that's fine. I know it took them long enough to even allow tips in their app, so if they want to lose that, that's fine. What is down to the penny here is the wheelchair accessibility strategy. This piece seems to be very in-depth, while everything else is hardly mentioned. During consultations, we were told that a cap on the number of vehicles was being reviewed. It's happening now in New York City, not even mentioned in this report. For the accessibility strategy, I must say, I don't call myself a numbers person, but the math just doesn't work out. To my knowledge, there are 550 TTL or wheelchair accessible licenses and a budget collected strictly from the members of this industry at $5 million a year outlines $2,800 for each operator with the opportunity for an additional $1,800. This is less than half of the amount being collected. Less than half of the amount being collected. Where's the rest of this money going? I went to the accessibility consultations along with TTL driver consultations, and at every meeting, there was a discussion of the idea that TTL vehicles were not being utilized properly. Hundreds of them either working independently as standard cabs or part of brokerages that had no platform for connection. It's widely agreed by members of the disabled community, advocates in attendance, that people should have access to all TTL vehicles, perhaps through an app where orders for this service would take priority. People would be well served by this. Instead, there's a fund that doesn't begin to answer any of the problems. The vehicles are falling apart. We heard from drivers and riders that they're not comfortable in the vehicles. Here's the problem. The strategy will fail. Total destabilization of this service is what I see in this report. Even if they get the maximum amount allowable, it's not enough for them to replace those vehicles, and they're not going to do it. There's also no mention of wheelchair accessible training in this report. It doesn't make any sense. It's not strong enough. I'm asking it for this report to be taken back for clarification. The accessibility strategy looks generous on the cover, but it's not. The training, it's just mentioned with no detail. Lack of interest in the environment is frankly atrocious, and the safety in PTC vehicles by way of no need for cameras. So instead, we'll re-victimize victims by working with the he said, she said scenario. Having Toronto, PTC companies will sign a waiver that holds Toronto innocent in any of these situations. So I read that as well.
Sorry,
Please take a
Christine, I
chance
need
to
you to
look at the
wrap up.
Ryerson report that was released today as well.
Thank you. Questions to the deputant? So no question to the deputant? So I just wanted to ask for the percentage of vehicles that are wheelchair accessible.
Right.
So right now, my understanding is, the taxi cab fleet's about 13%. PTCs are 0.042.
Yeah.
And limousines are at 0.
Yeah, I think there was an update that was released a couple of days ago that it's actually 8 to 11% instead of 13. Did I read that, Carlton? I think there was an adjustment to anyway.
Yeah, so
Yes.
would you,
Yeah.
from Beck Taxi's perspective, what's an acceptable level? Is 13% acceptable
I
for
absolutely.
all three categories,
So
or?
if, for example, if you look at our fleet, we've got about 1,900 vehicles altogether, but 145 are TTL or wheelchair on demand. We still struggle to reach that on-demand equitable service, and it's not easy. And what we're doing now, so for every time we dispatch a wheelchair accessible trip, we're subsidizing the first $10 of that trip. So we're of course charging the customer the same amount as they'd pay in a standard taxi, but we're also paying them an additional $10 because we know This system is not sustainable. But worse than that, in the winter, and there's one of our hopefully present, but I think past customers here who waited, and we couldn't get that wheelchair accessible vehicle, except the fact that there are 500 of them around the city. If we had access to all of those, we'd have no problem. The idea that it's compartmentalized into different companies who are each working with 100 here, 100 there, it's completely inefficient, it's completely unfair. I'd say that, you know, the idea in the beginning that we would have a pool of all these vehicles so that people would actually be able to access the accessible vehicles makes sense. And there's no mention of that. Every meeting I went to, we all talked about it. Everyone seemed to believe that that would be a path forward, and that would be what's, you know, the most equitable way forward, not even mentioned in the report.
Okay, all right.
So 13% is enough, but they all have to be able to be accessed. There are hundreds of them operating as though they're independent cabs right now, not doing any wheelchair accessible work, or are parts of, as the last applicant said, you know, members of a 5-vehicle brokerage. Come on. Nobody's accessing that. They're not helping anyone. So the idea that they aren't part of, you know, still maintain those smaller connections. If someone wants to drive with Beck Taxi, but the priority would be those trips coming through that app or what have you, so that people can access all of the vehicles, not just, you know, they shouldn't have to call 6 different companies and hope that one shows up.
Right. And I can go to the Yellow Pages and call a company that will come and pick me up that's not a licensed taxi cab.
That's right. Yeah, and then so the alternative is an unregulated, unlicensed, you know, uninspected, you know, who knows what. But if that's the only company that can do that work, they're going to use it because they don't have the choice. And the idea that we don't offer people choice is frightening.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions of the deputant? Nope, okay, thank you very much. Next is Cheryl Hawks. Good afternoon. You have 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Ready, set, go. Okay. My name is Cheryl Hawks, and my 28-year-old son, Nicholas Cameron, was killed in March 2018 while traveling to Pearson Airport in an Uber vehicle. Over the past 15 months, my family and I have campaigned for meaningful, in-class, in-car driver training and testing for all rideshare drivers. And we've shared our story a lot. I've spoken to many people: police, prosecutors, victim services officials, taxi, limo drivers, rideshare passengers of all ages. I'm on a Facebook page for rideshare drivers in Toronto, and I've really learned a lot about their reality. I've met with Uber officials on 2 occasions. That wasn't any fun. I've spoken to transportation ministries officials in British Columbia, where they are working to bring in ride sharing, but with very strict safety provisions and facing a lot of opposition. It worries me that strong support for safety training could easily be eroded by the kind of intense lobbying councillors were subjected to here prior to the 2016, when you eliminated training altogether in the vehicle for hire sector. I worry about lobbying, not the fact of it, but the sheer volume and the lopsided nature. I know how dedicated Uber and Lyft are to making sure things go their way. They're going to have their thumbs in your eyes in the months leading up to a vote on this revised bylaw. And they're going to tell you, and I've heard that this happens, and I understand that it's called lobbying on steroids. They're going to tell you and your officials exactly how they want things worded, and they're going to push back and push back when you don't get it right. Uber and Lyft have been huge public relations success stories, but they are, by all accounts, economic disasters. Both firms have posted losses consistently and cannot predict when or if they'll ever be profitable. A recent article in the San Francisco Chronicle says the company's models are financially unsustainable because customers do not pay the full cost of services provided, which means someone else picks up the tab. In many cases, that's the broader public and the economy. Uber has warned that fares will go up with safety training. In truth, fares are going to go up anyway as a result of these companies going public. Shareholders want profits, and Uber doesn't have any, not until the real cost of a ride is reflected in the price of a ride. And by then, we may have handed over control of too much of our entire transportation system. Uber has something like 16 in-house lobbyists registered at City Hall, and the lobbyist registry shows pages and pages of records of contacts just on a single issue. I found records of 117 pages of tiny little print like this on one issue of contacts. How can any of us compete with that kind of face time with counselors, that kind of access, and that kind of determination full-time, all day, every day, to get this done? Rideshare drivers must be required to take a course before they are permitted to drive the public for money. And that course must include in-car defensive driving training. The training council approves must be real safety training, not some anonymous, remote, online exercise that someone's relative or friend could easily do for them instead. That is essential. And serious consideration must be given to a cap on the number of PTC permits issued, just as they've done in New York City. Right now, there are more than 90,000 rideshare drivers licensed by the city, and each of those drivers comes with a car. Bringing more and more drivers on stream is a revenue generator for Uber and Lyft, but it hurts existing drivers and clogs our street. The MLS report is a good start to bringing ride-sharing into a stronger regulatory setting, but many aspects of it are timid and vulnerable to negotiation and compromise. There is no mention of the scourge of sexual harassment and sexual assault in ride-hailing vehicles, something that police and victim services officials identified to me when Nick was killed as a chronic problem with Uber and Lyft. Short shrift is given to the critical issue of congestion management, to mechanical fitness.